In today's episode, I'm going to be making a portal. To start with, made some steps out of some styrofoam, and then added a bit of texture using a tinfoil ball. These would sit underneath the portal, and either side there would be a large runestone. To make the runestone, took some more styrofoam, and then carved it into a rock shape. I continued trimming around the edges until it didn't look so blocky and had a nice point to it. Then using the tinfoil ball again to smooth out some of the edges and add a stone texture throughout. Initially, I'd planned to have two stones standing straight upright either side of the portal, but after playing around with this a bit and having looked at it, it felt a bit too basic, so I cut the edges at a slant and then reattached them pointing outwards. I glued the steps down between the two rocks, and then started working up with styrofoam and more styrene rocks around the outside. I also felt that the base was a bit too small, so I made a larger base for beneath made out of XPS insulation foam and then mounted it on top of that. I then smoothed out the join between the two bases by mounting offcuts of styrene and old scrap pieces over the edge, so you'd have kind of a rocky bluff built up beneath it. This was then blended together by using a tinfoil ball to push the texture into it as well as push it into the base and the other pieces of styrene. For a basing paste, I mixed together PVA glue with some black gesso, fine sand, and some granulated cork flock. I then mixed this together until it was a nice, gloopy mess, and then smeared it over the base, mostly between the cracks between the styrene and the base. While this was still wet, I took some small aquarium rocks and pushed them into the paste. Once that had had a chance to dry, I filled in the unpainted areas with some more black gesso. Using a burnt umber, I painted the entire thing with a base coat, and then followed up on the rock surfaces with a mid-grey tone. I then used a tan colour to blend it together, using a dry brush throughout the entire piece, and then topped the piece off with a white dry brush on top of the rocks to pick out the final details and bring it back to a grey colour. With the base painting done, I moved on to some experimental stuff and tried to make a portal with some kind of magical effects on it. For the basis, I used some clear plastic from some food packaging, and then sunk this into the styrofoam. I then trimmed some other pieces down, so I could fit them over the gaps in the corners, while still leaving some small gaps at the bottom. Using a matte Mod Podge, I coated one side, and then sunk it against the piece of plastic in the centre. I then blobbed Mod Podge over the top of the edge, so it would round it out a bit, and seal it against the sides of the stones as well. After that had dried, I realised it wasn't quite 3D enough, so I moved on to a Vallejo water texture paste instead. And going over the edge again, but giving it a bit more 3D texture and a kind of a wavy pattern to the top of it. I also made sure I went over the edges between the trimmed pieces of plastic and the main piece. I repeated this process a few times over the front and the back of the piece, leaving only the centre completely clear. Once mostly dry, I then started to apply some paint to it. Now the cloudiness does disappear in time, but for now it is dry enough to paint. So going for a kind of fiery red portal, I started dabbing some red acrylic paint over the edge of the piece. And I wanted to go for a thin coat so it would still be transparent and let any strong light sources through as well. I also opted for stippling so it would have a bit more texture to it. With the red dry, I then moved on to an orange and overlapped between the centre of the piece and the edges. Repeating this process, I worked up to a brighter yellow, so it was brightest near the transparent section in the middle. And trying to catch the tips of the highlighted 3D kind of wave effect with the brightest yellow as well. With most of the painting now done, I applied some more matte Mod Podge onto the base, and then using an applicator, applied some static grass as well. As I always advise, don't tase yourself in the leg with a static grass applicator. For a final touch to make the portal appear a bit more magical, I took a very watered down turquoise paint and applied a very thin highlight on the tip of the highest ridges. Then once those had dried, it was finished. A kind of magical portal between some old standing stones. And you can still get transparency through the paint depending on the lights. But anyway, thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.